We are in a series we've called Stories from the Beginning. There's both stories from the book of Genesis. And for those of you who maybe don't know, my grandmother passed away last Sunday. There's a picture of her. She was only about 105 there. She was 107 when she died, so just a month and a little bit short of her 108th birthday. When somebody significant in your life passes away, Grandma, you start doing a lot of reminiscing. So this week has been very much a week of thinking back of Grandma and some of the things that she was key in my life for. She was a significant individual. Last time we were visiting with her, I actually asked her about, who it was that the kids went to, see if there needed to be, emergencies happen. And then I said to Grandma, you're that person for me. When my mom and dad needed me to be cared for, it was always at your place. My sister tended to go to the Mullen side. I went to the Baker side, and they would care for me when that needed to happen. And she said, I don't remember that. And I said, well, don't worry about it. I remember enough for both of us. But I've been thinking a little bit. This is a picture of my grandfather and my grandmother. This was their 60th anniversary, we think. So that was 6 years before my grandfather died, which would have made it 27 years before she died. She would live almost another 3 decades from this picture, which is to me just amazing. They shared 66 wonderful years married, and then she lived 2 decades after he passed away in his late 80s. Again, just did a little bit of reminiscing about, stories about Grandma and Grandpa. If you can't tell in that picture, my grandfather and I share a similar build. This is called the Baker physique in the family. He was a large, powerful man. He worked. He built houses with Grandma for a number of years, and because he was large and powerful, kids were usually scared of him. If something went wrong, us grandkids would always go to Grandma, not Grandpa. Not sure why. It was just what happened. And I've noticed the same thing with my grandchildren. They tend to go to Grandma and not Grandpa if something goes wrong. So I'm sharing that with my grandfather. He, though, was a very gentle soul. And one of the things that he did was he taught grade 6 boys for a number of years in Sunday school. And I think anybody who can teach grade 6 boys needs a little extra feather in their hat or something. That should get you danger pay. But he taught grade 6 boys, but he was such a gentle soul that he refused to teach about war. If the lesson called for a teaching from the Bible about war, he'd skip on to something else. He just wasn't going to do that. He didn't like talking about violence in the Bible. Probably, again, he didn't fight in World War II because he had some sort of a exemption, but he did work stateside during World War II. And I think that just kind of colored the rest of his life, and he just didn't want to concentrate on those sort of things. And so this week, as I was reminiscing and getting ready for this morning, I thought, this is not a story my grandfather would have taught. And then I started thinking about the book of Genesis, and I'm going, there's a lot of violence in the book of Genesis. There's, from being kicked out of the Garden of Eden is kind of a violent, you got the angels with the flaming swords guarding the way back. The flood, where everybody dies, except for Noah and his family and some animals. Story of Sodom and Gomorrah is filled with violence. And the story we're going to talk about this morning is filled with violence. And sometimes I think it's hard for me to get my head around why these stories might be important. I think they are. But it just takes me a while to kind of flip my mind into understanding what it is that we need to get out of these stories. So to set the background for this morning, we're going to talk about Jacob. And Jacob has been, he's been living for a long time. He's left. He's gone to his mother's homeland. There he has met some relatives. He's married a couple of women. He has gotten rich. And God has now told him to go back home. And so Jacob has now gathered his family together, all of his animals together, and has started to make the trek home. And on the way, he divides his family up so that if Esau, remember, Esau was going to kill him when he last saw him. So in case Esau catches up with anybody, he won't be with them. And if something does happen, they won't all be together. So he's kind of divided everybody up, sent them off towards Esau. And then he himself prayed. And during that prayer, he wrestled with God. This is a picture of Rembrandt, kind of trying to picture that moment when Jacob wrestled with God, wrestled with the angel. And they wrestled until morning, and then finally the angel touched the hip of Jacob, and there was pain, and Jacob let go. And God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. Israel means struggles with God. And he said, this is who you are now. You are someone who struggles with God. Now go home. Go back to Canaan, the land that was promised to your father, grandfather, Abraham. Go there. And so this is exactly what he does. And he starts and he runs into Esau, and they have this reunion, and they hug each other, and they're not trying to kill each other, which is good for brothers. And then they have a conversation. And then where we're going to pick up the story, Esau is starting to go home. Basically, maybe before I get there, Esau wants Jacob to come with him. They're going to Mount Seir. And so Esau says, come with me. And Jacob says, you know what? I would love to, but I've got some young animals, and if I drive them too hard, they're all going to die. So I need to take this at a slower pace. I will meet you at Mount Seir. I will meet you where you want me to be. But you just go. We'll follow. I know the way. But I'll follow at a pace that my animals can keep up. Okay. So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why it's called Succoth or Succoth. That word means shelters. After Jacob came from Paddan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver, he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. And there he set up an altar and called it Elohoi, Israel. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. If you want to write something down in your notes, it's in the wrong place. And I've got to be really careful here. We have come to the point where we don't tolerate what we would call blaming the victim. We react negatively to that. And I get it. I understand. We should. it's never the victim's fault. But having said that, there are some common sense things that we can do to sometimes stop what's coming. One is simply understanding the laws of the area. It is a struggle for us sometimes. I've heard the sermon. I've heard some of you preach the sermon to me, that people who come to our fair country need to understand our laws and live by our laws. You've told me that. And I don't disagree with you. They do need to. But the same thing happens when we go somewhere else. And sometimes we're not quite as willing to learn their laws. I was taking a group of teens and young adults on a trip to the States many, many years ago. And I remember having to sit down with my older guys, mostly, who are like 18 to 20 years old, and saying, you do realize that I need to get your parents' permission for this. And they said, well, I'm an adult. Why? I said, you're an adult here. But where we're going, the age of majority is 21. You're not an adult there. We need to make sure we've got all of our, I's dotted and T's crossed, because that's the law where we're going. And when we're going to the United States, it just doesn't seem like it's that different, that they would be that different, but it is. Country songs like to make fun of, the fact that you can drink in a bar in Canada at 18, 19, but you got to be 21 down south. Just the way it is. So if you're going from here to there, you just need to understand. I don't know whether it's changed, but when the marijuana law came out in Canada and you were able to smoke marijuana legally in the country, if you smoked marijuana legally in Canada, that meant you could not cross the border and go into the States. Even if it was legal in the state where you were going. Still, the federal border would prohibit that. You couldn't do that. It's the law that is there. In Shechem, the law is that women are property. Now, we don't have to agree with that. I don't. And the idea that it's property means that whoever wants to do to an unaccompanied woman, it is quite legal from their standpoint. There might be damages to pay later, which is what they will figure out, but women are property. This is the law. And so here we have Dinah, and she's going out to try to have fun, and she runs into trouble. And there's some things that she could have done not to get in trouble. One of them would have been stay home. Now, again, it sounds like I'm blaming the victim, and I'm not really trying to, but there are things that we do to keep ourselves not in trouble. My wife, just so you know, one of our common arguments when I come home from work is that I don't lock the door. So I've told her, just don't say hi, don't talk to me when I get home, because you're going to disturb my line of thought, and I'm going to forget to lock the door. So she's now, she stands and looks at me while I lock the door. But the door is locked. Now, should we live in a society where we don't have to think about people breaking into our house? Sure, we should. But we can stop it, at least stop good people from breaking into our house by locking our doors. It's something that we do. Another guy complained that the church is always locked. And I'm going, yeah, it is. Because, well, I was in one church where they stole the sound equipment twice. We had in this church, not recently and not with these chairs, but we had a guy come in and pee all over the sanctuary floor one day. And all over the chair. It wasn't a nice thing to have to deal with. So we lock the door. We shouldn't have to, but we do. There are things that we can do. Andy and I get into arguments all the time over gun control. he's on one side, I'm on the other. But to me, I watch some of the news from the States, and you know, there should be, there's no way that you can justify some of the things that have been happening. If you have a carry permit, you should be able to carry a gun and feel safe. I'm okay with that. But I also know that if you get pulled over by a police officer and you tell him that you have a gun, he is going to be a little bit nervous, more nervous than he would normally be. And when police get nervous, bad things happen. So whether you've got a right to carry a gun or not, sometimes wisdom is don't carry it. Stay safe. I'm not trying to blame the victim. I believe that they have the right to do it. It's just sometimes that right doesn't follow out into practice. Think of it this way. I did check the law on this. In Alberta, if you want to cross a street and you do so in a crosswalk, you are totally in the right. So if you go to a crosswalk, unless there's a don't walk sign or a red light or something, and you're just in a crosswalk, you can step out onto that roadway and cross the road, and you are completely in the right in a crosswalk. Okay? Make sense? Does that mean that when you get to a crosswalk, you just step out? You look left, you look right, you make sure a car's not coming. Because even though the car's in the wrong if he hits you, it's not really going to matter much. Well, at least not to you. You'll either be really hurt in the hospital or dead. Take your pick. But, you know, it's a lot easier just to make sure that the car's following the law as well as you. There are things that we can do that will make ourselves safer. Dinah could have stayed home, but she didn't. Here's what it says. She went out to visit the women of the land. Josephus, a historian in the first century, just after Jesus, said that this is really what they're saying. Dinah snuck out and went to a party in the city. So she was where she wasn't supposed to be. She snuck out of the house, went to a party, and in the process, got hurt. Is that her fault? No. She should have been able to do it, even though the law would have made this acceptable. But there were things that she could have done, including staying home or taking a brother with her, that would have made it more safe than when she did. There are things that we can do in our lives that make our lives more safe than if we just go off on our own whims and do what we want to do. But that is not the end of the wrong place. It's not just Dinah that was in the wrong place. In fact, if you're going to put blame here, I think there's more blame to go on Jacob than there is on Dinah. Dinah was in the wrong place, but so was Jacob. So in Genesis 33, we read this. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. I know I'm reading between the lines. Later he makes it very clear, which he probably should have done here. But God's statement to Jacob is, go back to Bethel. I am the God of Bethel. Go back to Bethel. That's where I want you right now. I want you in Bethel. So he meets Esau, and Esau's from the area of Mount Seir. And Esau says, come to Mount Seir. Come to where I live. Spend some time with me. And Jacob says, sure. So here's a map. And Mount Seir is actually kind of off the bottom of the map there. So that's where Jacob was hopefully going to be with Esau. But Mount Seir is not Bethel. Bethel is there. So you can see there's quite a distance. One's below the Dead Sea, one's above the Dead Sea. Shechem, where he ends up, where all this happens, is up here. Where is Jacob? Probably somewhere around in here. And so he's making his way south. Shechem is a little bit to the north. Bethel's a little bit to the south. Mount Seir's way to the south. And he meets Esau, and he says to Esau, Esau says, come to Mount Seir. And Jacob says, yes, I just can't get there fast. I've got young, I will come, but just let me get there at my pace. Esau leaves. And as soon as Esau's out of sight, what does Jacob do? He turns around and goes the other direction. To Shechem. Not to Bethel, where God had told him to go. He goes to Shechem. And he plants in Shechem. Yes, Andrew, you're fine. He plants himself in Shechem. He buys land. He can't help himself. His name means deception, and he's still deceiving. He hasn't changed from Jacob to Israel inside. It's only been a name change. In fact, maybe we should do this and call him Israel or Jakiel or something like that. Because he's not really Israel yet. He's not struggles with God. He's still deceiving. He's deceived his brother. He told his brother he's going to follow him. And then he turns around, goes the opposite way, and buys land. That's not following your brother. He doesn't go to Bethel. See, Jacob wants to be close to the city. He wants to be where the action is. And that puts him in the wrong place. And as a result of Jacob's not wanting to be where he's supposed to be, his daughter pays a price that she shouldn't have had to pay. Let's continue the story in verse 11. Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and I will give you whatever you ask. Make the price for the bride and the gift I am to bring as great as you like, and I'll pay whatever you ask. Only give me the young woman as my wife. Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. They said to him, we can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. We will enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all your males. Then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We'll settle among you and become one people with you. But if you will not agree to be circumcised, we will take our sister and go. Their proposal seemed good to Hamor and to his daughter and to his son Shechem. The young man, who was the most honored of all the father's family, lost no time in doing what they said, because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of the city to speak to the men of their city. These men are friendly towards us, they said. Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters and they can marry ours. But the men will agree to live with us as one people only on the condition that our males be circumcised as they themselves are. Won't our livestock, our property, and all the other animals become ours? So let us agree to their terms. They will settle among us. All the men who went out of the city gate agreed, and Hamor and his sons Shechem and every male in the city was circumcised. Inaction, lies, and deception. The first problem. Jacob does nothing. First problem, well, not the first problem in the story, but first problem in the response is that Jacob does nothing. He doesn't tell his sons what's happened. He lets them find out by himself. He's got no plan. He doesn't take control of the situation. He doesn't tell his sons, hey, listen, guys, I've got everything under control. You guys can just settle down. Don't need to do anything. I'm on it. I know what to do. Doesn't do any of that. He just simply does nothing. And by doing nothing, he opens up the door for his sons to think that it is their turn, their responsibility to come up with a plan. Come on, we do that all the time. Guys, if you do something and your wife or your girlfriend or whatever doesn't complain, you think you did it right. I know it. Nothing means yes in some ways. The same with our kids. If we don't make a big deal of them sneaking out of their room at midnight, then they think it's okay to sneak out of their room at midnight. Andrew, you're too young to be doing that. Just want you to know. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. He shook his head, yeah. I'm not sneaking out anytime soon. We do it all the time. Jacob didn't do anything, and so his sons thought that they were being in control, and they would do something. The actual reality is that I don't think that Jacob understood what to do in this moment. A number of years ago, I was in a church that we had a problem. It was a common problem with a lot of churches. It was, our music. And some people wanted me to do something about the music. And I was going, I understand the problem, but I don't have a solution that's going to please everybody. I mean, anything I do is going to make somebody mad at me. And the guy looked at me and said, we pay you to have a solution. And I'm going, wow, that's putting me in my place. It didn't change anything. I still don't have an answer to what you want. We can sing some soft songs and some louder songs. We can sing some hymns and some new. But that's not going to make everybody happy. That's what you're asking me. I still don't have a solution that's going to make everybody happy. And this guy was just irate at me because I didn't have a solution that was going to please him. Jacob did nothing. He didn't know the answer. He didn't know what to do, and he needed more time. And so he did nothing. He didn't ask his sons to pause. He didn't do anything like that. He just simply did nothing. Second, the brothers were dishonest. They came to Hamor and Shechem and said, listen, we need to find a solution that's going to work for us. We want to find a solution with you. That wasn't the truth. They were out for blood. They had no desire in any kind of solution that left any of the guys of Shechem to be still alive. They wanted something else. So they lied. They were dishonest. And they said, listen, let's work something out between us. The third thing is the brothers are committed to a ruse. The ruse is that, listen, we will combine ourselves economically with you if you will get circumcised and be identified with us. We will give our daughters to you, you will give your daughters to us, and we will live as one people if you will just do this. That's not what they were after. It had nothing to do with what they were after. They were not looking for a way to join. They were looking for a trick that would get them inside the door. And they hoped that this was the trick. This was how they were going to do it. And I can almost hear some of you right now. If that was my daughter, if that was my sister, I'd be reacting just like the guys are. I'd want blood. I want a ruse. But sometimes what we want and what God wants is two different things. I was down this week in Clara's home when Grandma died. She died Sunday night. And according to the business office, I had 24 hours to basically clean out her room. So I had to make a quick trip to Clara's home to get her stuff. And my cousin, who lives in Innisfail, and my uncle, who lives in Innisfail, went down with me. And we cleaned out the room, and they took the big stuff in because he had a truck, so he could take the big stuff away. And then we had lunch, and we were talking about something in the church. And my uncle turned to me and said, "What do you think God thinks about that?" And I said, "That's a good question. It's one that we don't probably ask enough. It's not what I think about it, whatever the situation. It's what does God want out of this situation? What is God asking me to do in this situation? How am I supposed to react with his wisdom?" And maybe we get ourselves into a lot less trouble if we would just ask that question. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword. They took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all the wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But they replied, "Should we have treated our sister like a prostitute?" That next blank is a detestable response. It's one we probably would have felt ourselves. But it's not the one God wanted. We understand the anger. We know the anger. There is a reality of assault and violence that is around us all the time, and we get angry. And we want something done. But sometimes what we want done is not what needs to be done from a God response. Nelda and I live just north of Londonderry Mall. And a week and a half ago, there was a man shot dead just a few blocks from our house, right down by Londonderry School, which I drive by every day. I want a response. I mean, according to the news, he was going to get a jacket out of his dad's car so he could go to work as security at ETS. And while he was out there, he was shot twice in the chest, twice in the neck, once in the head. Seemed like a little bit of overkill. And it's not that far from us. Londonderry Mall is like right there. It's just the other side of it. We need a response. But God, what is the response that we need? This wasn't the response that God wanted. And there's a reason. Whenever things like this happen and we take the violent answer, we are just stoking that violence to get a little bit more and a little bit more. If I mention feud to you, probably the immediate response from you would be the Hatfield and the McCoys. It's 150 years ago, but we still know the story of the Hatfield and the McCoys and the feud that they had for decades. The Hatfield and the McCoys were two families that lived on two sides of the Tugafork River. One in West Virginia and the other in Kentucky. And they didn't like each other. Actually, both of them fought for the Confederacy during the Civil War, except for one guy. His name was Asa Harmon McCoy. He fought for the Union instead of the Confederacy. The only one out of both families that did. And when he broke his leg and had to be discharged from the Union Army, he came home to find that the Hatfields, basically, the Logan Wildcats, which was an ex-Confederacy soldier group, was out to kill him. And so he hid out in a cave until on January 7th, 1865, somebody shot him. We never did solve the mystery. We don't know who did it. It was likely the Hatfields, but we don't know. Here's the problem for the Hatfields and the McCoys. They actually all agreed that Asa had done something wrong by fighting on the other side. So there wasn't much of a response because Asa died. At least not immediately. 13 years later, there was another conflict between the families. And then the story of Asa Harmon McCoy started to be told among the people without context to rile up the Hatfields and the McCoys against each other. And as a result, they killed dozens on both sides of the feud. Many were thrown in jail. One was executed during the next couple decades. One thing happened, and then another, and then another, and then another, until there was all-out war between the two. That's what Jacob was afraid of. He said, I am afraid that the people that live in this area are not going to trust us anymore because of what we did. They're going to attack us. We're going to attack them. This is going to be all-out war until one of us is gone, and I'm afraid, guys, it's going to be us. There had to be something different, some other kind of response. If we had just looked for it. Why is the story pertinent to us? Because we sometimes need that same decision making. God, how do we confront the reality of violence in our lives and do so in a way that honors you, that won't stoke it up? How do we offer forgiveness even when it's really hard? I'm not saying it's easy. It's not. I know. But somehow, the reality is that as Christians, we've got to say, listen, the violence stops here. We don't approve of what you did. But we're not willing to keep this fight going. Jacob didn't do any of that with his sons until he was on his deathbed. When Jacob was on his deathbed, he gave a prophecy out over all of his sons. Listen to what he spoke over Simeon and Levi. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly. For they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed by their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel, I will scatter them in Jacob and I will disperse them in Israel. Two prophecies that actually came true in different ways. Simeon, because of his unfaithfulness, simply disappeared. The tribe of Simeon was basically absorbed into the tribe of Judah. and it was never to return again. It was dispersed within Judah. Judah took over their land, and that was the end of the tribe. Levi actually had a better ending, but only because he and his tribe, or his tribe, reacted well when that golden calf was built by Aaron in the Exodus. It was Levi that stayed faithful, or at least his descendants that stayed faithful. It didn't mean that Levi wasn't dispersed. He was. His tribe was. But they were dispersed as a blessing to Israel, as the priests and the worship leaders of Israel. And they were taken and scattered throughout Israel because of the faithfulness they showed at the golden calf. But the charge was the same. Both tribes were dispersed among Israel. The truth, whether we want to accept it or not, is that we often have the same type of decisions in our lives. We can do it our way and find our efforts scattered so that nothing happens. Or we can follow God and say, God, lead us even in this horrible moment of our lives. Even among the reality of violence in our lives, God, just lead us so that we can honor you even now. The people that are watching us, they don't think you're Christian because you act good when there's no stress happening. What amazes them is when you react in a godly way, when everything is pushing down on you and you have no strength left. When you're facing death, sickness, problems, and yet you're still willing to praise God. Still willing to say, God, I need you. I need you. And I will follow you. I won't do what it is that I want to do right now. I will do what it is that you direct me to do. I will go to Bethel. I will get on my knees. I will stay there until I feel like I have a direction that is godly and from you. Then I will act. But too often we don't. We just make excuses. God, I'm only human. Forgive me for my anger. It's something God's had to work with me a lot with, because I can be a really angry person. So I've tried to submit that to him and say, God, how would you want me to react? What do you need me to say? What do you need us to say? Inhabit us. Help us to be more and more like Christ, so that even under stress, our responses become yours. Let's pray. Father, we hate stories like that of Dinah. We see too many of them in our world right now. We're looking for ways to speak to the violence that is present right now in our world. And God, we don't have the answers. And so we come to you. Help us to react in moments of violence with your peace. Help us to have a proper understanding of forgiveness as something that comes from you and sets us free. Help us to love even those who are not like us, even those who believe differently from us. We don't get to do that on our own power, but we can do it in your power. Come, Holy Spirit. Come into this place. Change us. We ask in the name of Jesus. Amen.